So let's begin by bowing in. Welcome everyone to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. We're working our way through Chögyam Trungpa's The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. We're on volume 1. And tonight we're going to be dealing with chapters 34, 35, and 36. These talks, this is a digest actually, these 3 volumes of talks that Trungpa Rinpoche gave to students at a program held every year called Seminary. He would take about 125 to 250, varied year by year, students away for 3 months and would give Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana teachings. And there would be a lot of practice and study. And these 15 years of teachings have been digested by Judy Leaf into these 3 volumes, and we are working our way through them. I want to encourage everyone that if you would like to discuss your meditation practice, nothing could be more valuable. And Barry, Laura, and I are available if you just contact us. Let me think, there is one more thing to announce. Well, can't think of it now, so perhaps it'll come to me later. And now we're going to start. Barry's going to present the first chapter. And here we go.
Okay. Yeah, we're getting along through this book. We're up to chapter 34. Cutting thoughts and short-circuiting the kleshas. And it starts out with pagyö, a residue of mindfulness. Honestly, this is a term, there's several terms here were new to me, and they're very interesting. Pagyö, a residue of mindfulness that comes from meditation practice, especially from a daily practice. That sitting every day, the practice of returning from thoughts and dreams becomes more and more natural, more familiar, more just a part of life, like the way life is for you. He says in the reading, residues are produced when what you experience on the spot is confirmed by your previous experience. So that as you meditate, there'll be a spark, there'll be an aha moment, or any kind of recognition at all for that matter, that this is something that you had been studying or had been in the teachings, and here's an experience of it. And this creates a residue, a kind of a reference point. And it does that in a way that stays with you throughout your day, on the cushion and off. So pagyö is also translated as conscientiousness or being heedful. So we had talked earlier about the way in which mindfulness can kind of seep into the rest of your life. And here we're looking a little more specifically at that. And then from pagyö, we come to trenshe, recollection and knowing. Trungpa is wakefulness or recollection. Now, This recollection is not related to memory in the usual sense. It does not mean reliving past events exactly. It is recollection, collecting yourself, bringing your mind and body into synchronization. The body is in the present, and so this is another way to think about wakefulness, being awake, being fully present. He says, Trungpa is a process of discovery in which you are touched precisely rather than being overwhelmed by emotions or excitement. So, touched precisely. The thoughts, emotions occur and you see them clearly, precisely, and are not carried away with them. You remain here. So, he says with Trungpa, you have some kind of memory or recollection, and sheshin is a check on those recollections. Sheshin is translated here as knowingness. So with Trungpa, there's wakefulness, and then sheshin, knowingness, has to do with working with that awareness. You might say with situational awareness. He says Trungpa is the possibility of working with what is happening, and Sheishin is actually dealing with what is happening. I've got an analogy here that's imperfect, but well, stick with me. This may have some value. In the same way that you may notice a coffee cup on the table, in that moment, there's a flash of awareness, coffee cup. And that's like Trungpa, at least in this analogy. And in that moment, you know why it's there and whether it's empty or full. That's Sheishin. Without Trungpa, your vision would go by the cup without any recognition of it. With Sheishin, the presence of the cup, without Sheishin, the presence of the cup would have no relationship to the situation. So in this scheme, pagyö, residue of mindfulness, gives rise to wakefulness, or Trungpa, and knowingness, or sheshin, and that brings one fully into panoramic awareness and the possibility of acting properly. He says, the main point of Trungpa and sheshin is that a sense of knowing or seeing always happens, being wakeful, open, and precisely there constantly. With pagyö and trenshe, you might say that you can be at home in the present. This is a kind of maturation of shamatha vipassana practice. And it can be used to cut the kleshas. Now, just briefly, the kleshas we did go over a ways back in a chapter called The Painful Reality of Samsara, I think. And there we were presented with the three basic kleshas. And in that illustration of the wheel of becoming or of life, where you have Yama holding like this wheel that represents all of our experience. Right in the center, where there's this little circle with a rooster, a snake, and a pig. And these represent passion, aggression, and ignorance. The world of kleshas is the world of neurosis. It's a claustrophobic world in which intense emotions and deadening indifference. You might say that the kleshas are the fuel that feeds our neurosis, keeps us churning, grinding our gears in cyclic preoccupations. Maybe it's the other way around, but in any case, they are at the root of things, at the center of that circle, and they are the source, the root of all of our suffering. Now, he's presenting the 6 root kleshas, which are an expansion of those 3 main kleshas, and I'm just going to go through those briefly here. I'm not going to spend too much time on them, but there's ignorance, which is, in ignorance, you're living without insight or introspection. You might say just kicked back in a lazy boy and zoned out, possessed with comfort seeking. The second klesha here is aggression. And a little clarification here, this aggression is not how we normally think about aggression. It's not just being pushy or heavy-handed, but it is the deliberate intention to hurt or destroy. And elsewhere in the reading, he says that it can also be controlling what you can, what is close to you, and then lashing out at everything that you can't. The third is passion, which is wanting comfort, wanting to feel good, brings passion. The thought, if only I could possess him, her, fill in the blank. Lust is certainly found here, as well as simple desire. Then pride. He says, you not only want to be entertained, you feel that you really deserve something good. Pride. I'm special and I deserve the very best. And then there's jealousy, which I think, jealousy, I think is pretty clear. Maybe John may certainly have more to say about that. And then finally, the 6th is avarice. And simply put, you want it all for yourself. Now, these summarize our suffering. They're a description or analysis of the mechanism of samsara. And it can be useful, actually, to become familiar with these and to study them, because it can be helpful in helping to disentangle yourself, not as an intellectual examination, but mainly by providing a reference point. When kleshas emerge, there is a recognition. Trungpa, that there is a klesha. Very much in the way that in sitting meditation, thoughts arise, thinking. And then you can work with that, which is where sheshin comes in. But of course, this is only possible if pagyö, the residue of mindfulness, is present and alive in you. Otherwise, you just pass it by. So in this way, you can meet your kleshas with awareness. My thought is that sitting practice is where kleshas go to die. That as you sit and simply witness thoughts and emotions without engaging, by simply returning to awareness again and again, you are depriving them of the fuel that feeds them. And then beyond that, there is the possibility of no longer needing technique. The technique of labeling thoughts, of returning to awareness, can become unnecessary. He says, even at the level of profound Hinayana wisdom, both the technique and what the technique is applied to could be used up. Because of that, you could attain Chögyam, which is egolessness. And that is the result of the achievement of shamatha vipassana meditation. There is more to Chögyam, but for now, we can just think of it as egolessness. That trenshe brings the possibility of cutting through the kleshas and becoming fully processed, as they say. There's a possibility of simply resting in awareness. Now, at this point in the reading, he says, such an inspiration can only come from the relaxation of having taken the refuge vow. Now, please do not take this as a requirement that you must take the refuge vow. That should be done only when you feel inspired to make that commitment, when the effectiveness of the path has become evident, when there is a sense of having found a home in the Dharma. But the point here is that by making that commitment of the refuge vow, it frees you to pursue the Buddha Dharma without getting sidetracked. There's a kind of a freedom there, freedom from distraction and doubt. From there, treading the path becomes much clearer and easier, actually. At the end of this chapter, he says, you realize that from now onward, there is only one journey. The journeyer and the journey become one single situation. You finally understand that individual salvation is indeed individual, and at the same time, it is universal. And there you have that chapter.
Thank you, Barry. All right. So, moving on 1 second. I'm going to reverse the order of the last two chapters. The third chapter we had was called Transcending Dualistic Mind. And really what he's doing here is he's identifying three of the key terms for mind in Tibetan Buddhism. The two of them are completely confused, have to do with confused mind. The third, rikpa, goes to transcendent, enlightened mind, ultimately, although it means a variety of things. Let's talk about the first. The first is called sem in Tibetan, chitta in Sanskrit. And what it refers to is dualistic mind, the mind of I and other. It's the mind of thought. Sem is often translated as ordinary mind, the mind that we walk around with all the time. If you read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, Suzuki Roshi calls it little mind. It's constantly involved with thoughts of myself and other. And in this regard, it has to do with the creation of emotions, which Barry talked about. The emotions, you see, are based on the activity of sem in a couple of ways. The emotions are the kleshas, are basically made up of two different aspects, the story and the energy. So for instance, if you feel hatred, you've always got a rationale for why you're hating that object of hatred, that person, or whatever it may be. That's the story. And then there's the energy of it. The energy is wanting to destroy it, kill it. If it's passion, there's a storyline about why you are attracted to the object of your passion. What about that object appeals to you, and you can tell that whole story. And then there's the energy of it, which is to consume it, draw it to you, magnetize it. And it's this way with all of the emotions. Sem is very much involved in the thinking process and in the energy process of this dualistic relationship that we have with the passions, with the objects of our passions, our kleshas. Sometimes sem is referred to as ego. It's the belief in I as well as other. And basically, it's constantly engaged in a game. The game is this game of I and other, story, back and forth, and the purpose of that game is to keep the illusion of I alive, to keep it constantly in action. Because when we stop and we come present into this present moment, I disappears. And then we come back to an I-other relationship. I love this other person. I hate this situation. I want to devour, or I desire this object of my passion. And it's always I and other, and the purpose of I is to keep that game of, that illusion of I, the purpose of this game, I alive. Once somebody asked Trungpa Rinpoche what the purpose of fear is. And he said, the purpose of fear is to prove that I exist. It's that way with all of the kleshas. And they are all embodied in this ordinary mind, sem, which is all about this game of I and other. This is not something that you need to believe in. It's something that you need to discover, experience in your meditation practice. That we can be involved in this I-other situation, which is very fraught with emotion, with klesha. Klesha means defilement, and what it refers to is these 6 emotions. And you can experience this in your meditation practice and see it, and see that whenever you come completely present, there is peace, there is clarity, and the I-other game dissolves, at least for a moment, and maybe longer. The second aspect of mind that he covers in this 3rd chapter is what is called yi in Tibetan, manas in Sanskrit. And we won't spend a lot of time on this. It's a very simple idea. What they're really doing is explaining all of the different ways in which dualistic mind operates and manifests. And what manas, or yi, is about is that there is a function in our minds that coordinates all the data of the senses. So right now, if you're looking at your screen and you're seeing this image of me and you're hearing this voice, the two are in sync. It's manas's job to bring them together. And if you're now aware of your bottom on the cushion or your seat that you're sitting on, as you're watching the image, as you're listening to the sound, all of that is being coordinated by manas. So manas is just a name for the fact that all of the data, these 6 knowables, the objects of the 5 senses and mental objects, can be coordinated, can happen simultaneously even. And that is the manas aspect of mind. The third aspect of mind is much more interesting. It's called rikpa in Tibetan, vidya in Sanskrit, and it really is usually translated as seeing, although there are many translations for it. There are different levels of rikpa. At the most ordinary level, rikpa is a kind of very ordinary intelligence. Your ability to do a crossword puzzle, your ability to hear what somebody is saying and understand it. It's very ordinary. It's almost like cleverness. If you have a lot of rikpa at this level, you might be really good at crossword puzzles, or you might be really good at mathematics or some kind of scientific problem solving. So rikpa becomes a kind of intelligence of mind, not in any transcendent sense, but in a very usable, practical sense. It also has, at a very low level, the meaning of cleverness. Somebody who has a lot of rikpa is a very clever individual. But beyond that, at the ultimate level, rikpa is terribly important because it is the faculty of mind that sees things just as they are, beyond I and other, beyond the kleshas. Whenever one comes completely present, there is rikpa. And the more completely present one becomes, the more powerful that rikpa is. Call it vidya in Sanskrit. Trungpa Rinpoche was given a title by the head of the Pagyö sect, the Vidyadhara, or Vidyadhara. And after he was given that title by the Karmapa, we all referred to him as the Vidyadhara, and it means the holder of Vidya. Vidya in this sense is very, very transcendent, very enlightened. It means that one is seeing this world as it truly is, beyond the image, beyond the illusion of I and other. So really the path is a movement away from sem, which is the aspect of mind that is involved in oneself and its relationship to other, that sees those relationships often in terms of klesha, pride, jealousy, desire, poverty mentality, hatred, stupidity, the stupidity of the animal realm. These are the realms. And it's a movement away from that towards rikpa. How does that happen? It happens because we begin to study and we begin to practice, especially a daily practice. And by developing a daily practice, we develop the inclination, almost a habit, of valuing coming present, of valuing realizing that we're lost in dream and waking up, coming back to this present moment. That's the pagyö. It's that inclination that it grows and grows as we do it more to come back. And it's one of the most valuable aspects, valuable contributions, you might say, or developments of sitting meditation. Sitting meditation slowly builds this inclination in you, in me, in all of us, to come back from dream, to realize that we're dreaming, even just to realize that we're dreaming, and then come back. And when we come back, we recollect this present moment. That's the trenshe, and we see it. We know that we are here. It's just like in the morning. I keep saying this. When you wake up in the morning and you realize that you're dreaming, and you also know that you're no longer dreaming, that's the shepa, knowing. You know that you're here, and you know this world clearly. because you're no longer in that dream of I and other, that drama of I and other. We've stepped out of it. We've come back. So we develop that habit, that inclination. That's the pagyö. And then we begin to experience this trenshe. Tren is recollecting, that you remember to come back. And she is knowing that you're here, knowing that you're clear, knowing that you are awake again, and knowing what the contents of that awakeness are, whatever it is that you're experiencing through the five senses and in your mind. So the importance of sitting meditation is huge, because you're developing this enormous inclination, the pagyö, to mental health. It's the ability to come back, the trenshe, into this awareness that cuts the kleshas. The kleshas depend on you being lost in a story. I'm mad at that person because they did thus and thus such to me, and I'm going to get even, and da, 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 da. And all of this energy, the energy of hatred, is contained within that story, is stimulated by that story. And when we come back, when we cut that story, and we come back into the present, all of that energy dissolves. To the extent that we only cut it a little bit, the energy stays around to some degree. So trenshe is recollecting awareness. Pagyö is the inclination to do that. Trenshe is recollecting it. She is awareness, knowing. She is the root of the word to know. One of them, one of the many words to know in Buddhism. And when we know the true moment of this present moment, we cut through those stories of the kleshas, of the emotions, of the defilements, which otherwise can rule our lives. Now, there's more than that, to say the least. And I'm really kind of stunned by this chapter. The last chapter, actually it was the second of the last chapter we read tonight, chapter 35, An Element of Magic. This was really very tantric. And I guess he felt that it was important to say it at the beginning. I think it was also important because it was part of who he was. That the more we practice and the more we come back into this present moment, the more we begin to tune into a magical quality of life. That this world, this experience that we have, is so vivid, so beautiful, and so utterly inexplicable how it arises and passes away continually. That it's very magical. And more than that, that the experience one can have as one begins to become more completely present changes. That this world is not simply an ordinary ho-hum thing. And the events are not utterly familiar, everyday, repetitive, but quite the reverse. That this world can be extraordinarily alive, communicative, amazingly beautiful, in the moment, and that seeing that, beginning to see that, is an extraordinary kind of magic. He says, unconditioned truth has extraordinary power. Unconditioned truth. This is beyond sem, beyond ordinary mind, beyond mental events, I and other. Unconditioned truth. It's just this. It's arising right now. Inexplicably, here it is, all of this magic. He says, in meditation practice, We are tuning ourselves into an entirely different way of thinking. I don't even think it's thinking, as opposed to our ordinary samsaric way. We are automatically entered into a kind of spiritual power. The reason Dharma is regarded as sacred is because its contents are outrageous. It is in touch with the energy of cosmic flow of the world. To be increasingly in touch with this is the gift of the lineage, the gift of the teacher. And it's the power of the lineage passing down to each one of us increasingly. And what allows that to happen is our willingness to practice, to sit, to work with our awareness by watching our breath, by coming back to simple awareness in this present moment, by dealing with boredom. We create the space for this to happen. He says the essence of meditation is tuning oneself into higher truth or magic. I'm amazed that this is at the Hinayana level. And this can only be taught by a competent teacher who has the message and personal experience handed down by the lineage. We are very fortunate to be in the flow, in the line of someone like Trungpa Rinpoche, because that message, that magic came very powerfully through him, especially in his relationships, his one-on-one, his personal relationships with his students. He says, finally, meditation puts you in position to experience the magic. And I know there are people who have, it comes in moments and flashes, and it changes the world and it changes what life is. So we come to this path, we sit, we develop our pagyö. Our pagyö is this residue, this tendency to want to come back. It can take a long time if you're as obstinate as some of us like me are. But you do it, you keep hammering, you keep coming back. By sitting, we are making the gesture of giving up ego. Ego is this constant desire for entertainment, because without entertainment, ego ceases to exist. That's what ego is. Ego is a constant entertaining game of one kind or another. Could be hatred, could be desire, could be passion, could be lust, all kinds of games. And they grow and they diminish. Might be boredom. Boredom's a good one. Who's bored? I'm bored. Constantly reaffirming the existence of I. And when we sit, we are making the gesture of giving that up, however difficult that is. And it begins to plant that as a seed in us. And more we think about it, and more we remember as we walk down the streets of our lives to come back from dream. And when we come back, we recollect this awareness. We remember it. That's what the recollection is. We recollect it. And we know, as soon as you come back, you know that you're back. That's the she, trenshe. And by doing that, we can cut those stories that feed the kleshas, passion, aggression, pride, jealousy, stupidity, all the rest. Without those stories, they dissolve. And we can begin to come present, and the more we come present, the more we begin to be in position to experience the extraordinary beauty, call it magic, call it power of this present moment, of this world, as it arises around it, it's a miracle. There's no explanation for it, ultimately. So that's all I have to say for this evening. And we could have a discussion. Tully.
John, I'm going to preface my question by saying if you're not comfortable answering it, I'm cool with that. But as you talked about magic, what I thought I heard you say was that it was particularly powerful in those personal relationships, or the one-on-one, the personal experiences people had with Trungpa. And I wondered if you would be willing to share with us one of your magical experiences that was particularly powerful with Trungpa. And again, if you're not comfortable saying in front of you, I'm cool with that. But that's something that would be interesting to me, at any rate.
I was married to a woman named Beverly Webster. And hold on a second, I'm trying to get this recording to work right. In any event, she was Trungpa Rinpoche's secretary for quite a few years. She passed some years ago. And she used to refer to him as Mr. Magic. She called him that. And she was a very sophisticated human being. I don't know what to say to your request. There are moments, you can read about them, between teacher and student that are very powerful and illuminating. And Trungpa Rinpoche, I think, was much at his best when he was one-on-one or one-on a few students, much better than his public speaking, to me anyhow. That's the way I felt. I mean, I'm writing these things up because I don't want them to die with me. But you're right, I don't feel comfortable talking about them in this situation, I don't think. But I want people to know that that kind of extraordinary communication exists and is passed down in our lineage. And it can happen between us. It's more difficult because, it takes, he says it in this chapter, it takes an extraordinary, a person who is powerful and in the lineage to do it well. It came out of him. I think all of us who knew him personally felt that when we walked in the room changed, the room with him. I always felt it was as though somebody had just turned the rheostat up and the lights got brighter. And everyone I know felt that he was reading our minds. I mean, it's just like I would sit with him, maybe having dinner, and he'd be passing the salt before I thought to ask for it. That's what I always felt. It's a matter of really being present, and we can all experience this magic. Yeah, and this magic is not some form of entertainment. It has to do with how we can love our lives as they arise right now. And we forget it all the time. We get lost in our petty concerns and in our petty minds. And then we can come back and look at this amazing display that we're all sitting in the midst of, with full of heart and warmth and people. I remember one time standing on the front porch at Tail of the Tiger, now called Karme Choling, with him. And he was looking out at this crowd of people, you know, all these people that are there for the seminar. And he said, they're all made out of people. And at another time, I was standing on a front porch with him. And this isn't magic, but I mean, it's his mind, here in Boulder. And we were looking out at the day, and it was a very nice day. And he looked at me and I heard him say, we were both looking out at the scenery, and I heard him say, beautiful day, huh? And I knew something was up. It didn't sound right. And I looked at him like, what? And he said, an obscene remark. And what he meant was that you stand there and you're looking at the sunset with somebody. And you say, oh, isn't it a beautiful sunset? And it's as though by each one of you saying it, you can make it even more than it is. More than the sheer appreciation of what is happening in life gives you. But he emphasized that the very nature of our enlightened relationships with a teacher, with each other, is open communication in this present moment. That doesn't mean you tear open your shirt and you confess to all your sins. It means you are open to responding to that person appropriately in the present moment, without being guarded, without having an agenda. Open-hearted response. And there's magic in that. But thank you. It's a powerful question you asked.
Thank you. And I'll look forward to reading those writings one of these aeons.
Okay. Wait a second here. Who else?
I have something, John.
Rikpa.
I just want to acknowledge that I always feel very, very moved and simultaneously frustrated when I hear you describe the appreciation, the beauty of the moment of this world that we live in. Because I do get slivers of seeing that, and it's overwhelming. And most of the time I don't. Most of the time I go through life like it's another day. And I feel like this is why I'm here, is to acknowledge that that's my truth. And I want to appreciate the beauty of this moment and to experience it with friends, but with my family. And I can't imagine, and I'm really being honest, I cannot imagine experiencing that depth with my husband, because he's the one I love the most. And it feels impossible. So I just wanted to acknowledge that it's almost too big to imagine.
It's not. And you have I mean, you're expressing it right now. Your love for him. It's really a matter, you see, we come to this path and we're very confused. And we've developed habits over long periods of time. Habits that are very destructive, self-destructive. And then we begin to see glimmers of opening, of possibility by meditating, by considering these teachings. And what we're doing here is we are slowly shifting our loyalty from the neurotic, unhappy, I-other propositions of life that are so fraught with conflict and struggle and self-hatred. We're shifting our loyalty from that to letting go and coming back into this present moment. And we're really just beginning. And to the extent that you say it isn't happening fast enough, that's more of the same. That's more of that wantingness. But to the extent that we sit and we come back again and again, and that we open ourselves to our loved ones, we begin to shift our loyalty from this unhappy I-other struggle, which involves self-hatred and self-improvement. The two go together completely. You know, you can't have self-improvement unless you don't like what you've got. And then you say, well, I don't like that, so I'm going to improve it. It's giving that up and coming present again and again. It's developing a new habit, you might say, or a new way of being. Shifting one's loyalty. And it takes a while. It takes a lot of practice, but we can appreciate it because there are those moments of openness with the people that we love. There are those moments of peace that we experience in our practice or in our lives. There are those moments of beauty when you see a work of art and it pierces you and it moves you and fills you with love and emotion. And all those moments keep coming. And that's why we're here. That's why we're on this path, because we recognize that and we want to develop that. We want to shift our loyalty from these very repetitive, neurotic, unhappy, self-hating propositions into openness, love of life, being there for other people, generosity, kindness. It's a big and it's a beautiful undertaking. And I know you're doing it. You're working at it. I know you are.
Thank you.
Who else? Jane.
Yeah. John, could you please talk a little bit more about flow and magic in the context of what Trungpa is defining? I'm doing a lot of work in a different kind of definition of flow, which has more to do with the neuroscience and biological, what happens in our brains. And it's usually, sometimes I'm trying to understand it better in reference to the typical references to very high performing athletes or people who seem to be doing that which is impossible, you know, extreme surfers or skiers, or, you know, he uses the example of the first person who ran a 4-minute mile. Everyone said, well, that's impossible. And once somebody ran a 4-minute mile, many people ran a 4-minute mile and then a 3-minute mile. So he talks about what happens, I guess, biologically, cognitively in your nervous system. And ultimately, he talks about it in the same way. This is Stephen Kotler, who I'm quoting, as magic happens. He uses the word magic and flow, or the magic enables one to experience flow. So I think what you're describing is just really the opposite, because what he's describing is total ego-centric and self. So I'm trying to relate this in my work to how it applies to all of us in our everyday lives, to be in a place, what we may be describing as off the cushion, and maintaining those same experiences that we have at times on the cushion. So can you help me clarify this a little bit more, this idea of flow and magic?
I think what you're asking about is the connection between magic on the one hand and extraordinary, say, athletic accomplishment on the other. Extraordinary athletic accomplishment.
Right.
I think that the idea of flow approaches this world of magic, and maybe enters it. I'm not sure. In that, what it's based on, both of them are based on. One way of looking at it is utter, total, unconditional confidence. This is a very important term in Tantric Buddhism. The word in Tibetan is zijin. And the idea of flow in athletes involves that kind of confidence. I'll give you an example. For many years, I was a technical rock climber, believe it or not, here in Boulder and in California and in other places. I spent a lot of time on 1,000-foot cliffs. And I knew some really extraordinary climbers. And one in particular was a fellow, his name was Skip. I'm not going to give you his last name. He was a lot younger than I. And there's a kind of thing you do in climbing, and you can do, called bouldering. Bouldering means that you do something very, very difficult, a difficult climbing problem, but it's very low down, and you don't need ropes, and you can just jump off. Well, I want to tell you, I've watched people boulder, and sometimes they get up higher than I would like to jump off without ropes. And this guy, Skip, was extraordinary. He just flowed across the rock.
Mm-hmm.
Total confidence. It was amazing to watch. I was doing there's a thing in climbing called top roping. You create a very safe situation. You put up a rope, and one person's standing on the ground, and the rope goes up through a pulley, and it comes down to the climber. The climber climbs up, and as he climbs up, the person standing on the ground is taking up the rope. And then if the climber falls, they don't go anywhere. Well, I was doing this problem one time with a guy who was a very, very fine climber. Really accomplished, quite famous. And we were doing this very difficult problem. He went up and he did it. And I went up and tried to do it. Now, this problem was a little scary because normally, see, if you just go up the rope and you fail, well, if you fall, you're not going to go anywhere, right? You're just going to go down and you're going to be at the end of the rope. But this one involved kind of a triangle. So if I was going up, and if I were to fall, I was going to swing across the cliff. And I went up and I tried it, and I failed, and I swung across the cliff. And I swung back, and I tried it a second and a third time, and each time I failed. And finally, the guy let me down, lowered me down. And he said to me, you know what you're doing wrong? And I expected him to say, you should have been putting this hand there and that foot there, you know, telling me sort of the technical things that I was doing wrong. And I said, what? And he said, you're thinking about whether or not you can do it. That's the lack of confidence. In this kind of magic, there is no self-doubt. Self-doubt is gone. That's what allows the world to come forward very, very vividly and beautifully. Total presence, zijing. When we first started teaching Shambhala training at Trungpa Rinpoche's direction, the Shambhala teachings, he created a poster for the very first public presentation of it. And I was wondering why. It was a calligraphy of the word zijing. And now I know. Because total confidence, you see, is not, you're not telling yourself, I can do this. If you're saying that to yourself, you're not confident. You're trying to bolster yourself. Total confidence is silent, completely silent. And that's the connection between that, I think, that kind of flow state, if you want to call it that, and magic. But the thing is that with athletes, ego creeps in so fast.
Right.
Hey, look what I did.
Right. That's what I'm struggling with, especially because I'm trying to apply this to ordinary, everyday people, but who are, I mean, everybody ordinary and everyday is also very special and extraordinary and can do extraordinary things. So how do we bring it to ourselves other than what we do here in meditation? I don't know what even to call it, but develop strategies or a mindset or a willingness to let go, maybe let go of ego or self-doubt. I think it's extraordinarily difficult to try to, you know, I'm not a teacher in that sense. I mean, I'm a teacher as I breathe, but this is something I feel could be, you know, really make a very, very big difference. And I'm just not sure whether flow is the hook to try to get there. I'm really struggling with it. That's why I'm unable to really express it clearly. But thank you. What you just said is really helpful about why if you just apply it to extreme athletes, it does become look at me, very egocentric. Yeah.
Can I?
Something about that?
I want to achieve the opposite of that.
Can I comment
Mika,
just briefly? So I think the connection is total dedication and total switch of allegiance. You were talking about switching allegiance. Well, I think that's when an artist or an athlete, or anything, is totally dedicated to their craft. They've switched allegiance. They are. It's a way of being egoless. Now, ego can come into it, but I think at the moment of creation, they're egoless because they're so focused on what's happening and what they're doing. They've so switched allegiance. They're not looking at themselves or their ego. They're looking at their total commitment and total involvement. And it's a form of meditation. I mean, it's a form of conviction, total conviction, that I think leaves you in the same place, at least momentarily.
and we can do the same thing in our meditation practice by coming present 100%. If only for an instant or for a longer period of time. And the more we do it, the more magical it becomes. And this world can transform from this veil of tears this ordinary humdrum thing that we think is so familiar into something very vivid and powerful and communicative, which is what the Vajrayana Tantra is all about. Tantra is all about this world as it presents itself to a mind that is clear, open. And what it's doing is it's communicating very, very powerfully and vividly what it is. In Tantra, they talk a lot about symbol, but the symbol is not a symbol of something else. What it means is that everything is a self symbol. It's communicating what it is so vividly and powerfully. And that's what Tantra is all about, the Vajrayana. And the path is heading in that direction altogether. And the more we sit, the more we develop our pagyö, which is our inclination, our habit, as it were, to come back. Because we spend so much of our lives lost in reflection, lost in dream. And so we begin to develop this habit of coming back. And there are moments, I know everybody has experienced them, of a shocking sort of wake up. When you open your eyes and you see something beautiful or something really ugly.
Yeah. Oh, I want to, if I can,
Yes.
Stan. I just want to quote in chapter 35, An Element of Magic.
Yes.
In the second paragraph, Chögyam Trungpa says, "The reason Dharma is regarded as sacred is because its contents are outrageous. It is in touch with the energy or cosmic flow of the world." And I think the thing about flow states, and the people you'll hear talk about it who have studied, either Taoism or Buddhism, flow states in a person don't exist in and of themselves powerfully. They have to be connected to the flow, the cosmic flow. There has to be this bigger flow that the individual flow is hooked into, is flowing with, and it's all over, I think it's all over Buddhism and Taoism, but, the cosmic flow, that's something Trungpa talks about in, many ways, and very directly.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Who else? Kurt.
Yeah, on this subject, it's I'm interested in that idea of allowing it to happen versus chasing it. I know for myself, working in the studio on artwork, there's a time when there's a flow where the whole world makes sense. It doesn't matter how messed up the news is of that day, but it all tends to make sense. And I think there's moments in the meditation where it just is. And then there's that danger of trying to chase it. I know in the studio when I try to chase it, it's not there. It just has to happen. And I'm wondering if that's the same idea in meditation, to have that glimpse and then try to catch it again and again, and versus just giving up and allowing it to happen.
I have a couple of thoughts. One is that in many art forms, you train again and again with technique. And then at some point, you transcend the technique. The person does. And they begin to operate in a more spontaneous fashion. There are teachings you can read about, for instance, Trungpa Rinpoche gave a seminar once, I think it was transcribed into a book called Transcending Madness. And he described how people can reach a height of insanity. And at that height of insanity, there's a kind of intensity of back and forth that is so powerful and so strong that a person can freeze for a second. And there is a moment when everything shatters and there's tremendous insight into the nature of reality, seeing this kind of magic. But the problem is that they have reached this height through really insanity. And so it doesn't last. You go back and they devolve back into being crazy again. I look at the works of Vincent van Gogh, and I think maybe that was where Van Gogh was. He was reaching those peaks of insanity where suddenly everything was cracking open and he was seeing the extraordinary magic and beauty of the world in those paintings that he gave us. But he was completely crazy. These teachings you can read. I think that's the book Transcending Madness when he talks about this idea. But then there are the wonderful artistic disciplines that you cultivate and you train in, and you develop your capacity to see and to communicate and to express what you're seeing. Yeah, Trungpa Rinpoche himself was an artist. A lot of paintings and flower arranging. He was a master flower arranger. He was constantly doing that. He felt that art was a way of expressing the magic and the beauty of the world. Boy, this really opened up something in that chapter. Trip.
Is it fair to say though too that the magic and flow is equally as powerful in the mundane? And things that come to mind for me are simple conversations with somebody where in the past you might have been constantly in a dream state, and you start to discover the ability to be there and actually coming back and listening, or simple problem solving with somebody, for example, or even momentary absence of neuroses. Is that also where I feel that's where the magic lives, and it's not particularly bliss oriented or accomplishment or achievement oriented as much as presence oriented in really mundane things. Is that fair to say?
You betcha. Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, that's where it lives. If one looks for extraordinary, I think you can pervert it. It's in absolutely everything. Yeah.
And it can be, the idea of flow in some ways implies to me that it's sustained, but in reality, it doesn't have to be sustained. It could be momentary, correct?
And it doesn't have to be special. It can be something completely mundane, washing a dish, having a conversation with your spouse, or your child or your friend or whatever it might be. That's where it lives. And it comes completely in coming present. And we can, each one of us, you see, we walk around thinking, oh, it's just humdrum. It's just the ordinary world. But when we come present, if we look, we can begin to see the magic, the beauty.
Thank you.
Well, friends, we need to keep practicing. Our meditation practice is good in the beginning. It's good in the middle. And it's supposed to be really good at the end. But it always has to do with sanity, coming back to our sane and better selves, and beginning to appreciate our lives and the people in them more and more. It's really wholesome. So I think we're going to end at this point. We're getting close to the time, yes. And we'll end with the dedication of merit, where we give away the benefit. That's a good one. We're giving away the benefit earned through this practice and through this study to all sentient beings. The dedication of merit. And we are included in that, by the way. We are part of all sentient beings. It's called the twofold benefit, self and other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory